right, I am. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. And for everybody who's tuned in, I appreciate that. And I only have a half an hour with you. So, and those who know me know I could talk for quite a while on this topic. So I am going to fire hose you with a lot of thoughts. And some of them, I apologize in advance. They might be a little rough. I will tell you what keeps me going in this business is every day I see the difference between how the best companies work and the rest. And there is a very big difference between those companies. I will also admit, despite my best efforts, that gap is getting bigger, not smaller. So take that for what you will. I certainly am trying to get it to go in the other direction, but you know, the truth is there's a lot of forces working against that. I always thought I had to my advantage the profit motive, because the companies I share their practices for, I want to be clear, nothing I'm going to share with you is, nothing I'm going to advocate to you is something that I invented or anything like that. Everything we talk about are things that we just see in the best companies that we work with. So, you know, we're talking about Amazon and Apple and Netflix and Google and Stripe and Shopify and Spotify, Slack, these really good product companies. And then I see so many companies, especially with what I do, I meet a lot of executives from other companies, and they know that they need to change because they frankly are being disrupted. They're being disrupted by Amazon, or in their financial services are being disrupted by Stripe. And they know they need to take it seriously, but they really don't know what that means. And then when I share or somebody shares with them what it means, they're scared to death. It's a huge change. So I spend a lot of my time on this difference. I think the difference is really inexcusable. I think I understand the reasons, but I don't think they're defensible. But for whatever reason, there are very big gaps between how product teams in general work. Now, we are talking about not the whole world of software development. I'm not talking about custom software. I'm not talking about Accenture's business. I'm not talking about, you know, your little IT group doing a little, you know, time vouchering system. I'm talking about companies that build technology-powered products to provide to customers. So that's the world that I live in. That's my interest area. And in that world, we have basically several kinds of product teams. And what I wanted to do was share with you what those product teams are and how they're different. Because honestly, from 100,000 foot level, they look alike. They really do. But when you get inside those teams, they are dramatically different. So you'll hear from David a bit about my history. I've just maybe to share where you're going to hear a lot of strong biases, and to share where they come from, it might help. So I started as an engineer for 10 years. I was writing software for Hewlett-Packard Laboratories. I was in their research lab. It was actually a terrific place to work. This was clearly before the internet. So this was when PCs were really happening and client-server computing was being developed. But I was in a research lab, which was called the Software Technology Lab. We were building technologies for other development teams. And in fact, my entire career, which truly, you know, I didn't give David the accurate number, but I just hit 40 years of tech-powered products exclusively. And through the entire time, the only time I didn't do products for developers was eBay. Everything else was focused on the developer community. So I love that community. I went early on, you know, at both HP Labs and Netscape, I was doing tools and services for development teams. Now, obviously, I'm doing more methods and practices for those teams. But I just love working with development teams, people who are creating great things out there. And, you know, HP was actually a very good place to learn this. It was considered the most consistently innovative company of their time. They were one of the earliest examples of empowered product organizations. Netscape was an amazing wild ride. Some of you, I realize, are not old enough to even know about that, but it was the original internet company. It was about 25 years ago now, but it was an amazing ride. It was the fastest company at the time to $1 billion of revenue. And I was responsible for platform and tools because I had sort of built a bit of a reputation about doing products for other developers. And so now the developer community was everybody that wanted to build an internet app, which at the time was most of the world wanted to figure that out. And they were moving from Microsoft essentially as a platform to the internet. So it was a dream job for me. I worked for Mark Andreessen. I learned a tremendous amount from him and from literally dozens of other people at Netscape that were just brilliant. Ben Horowitz was there. He was a peer of mine, but I learned as much as I could from him. And I won't keep going, but there were a lot of names there. eBay was great. I got to meet Pierre Omidyar, the co-founder, as part of the Netscape developer program. I loved the vision, but it was a marketplace, and I had never worked on a marketplace, and it was really fun to learn about real buyers and sellers out there instead of just other developers. But anyway, after eBay, I wanted to work with lots of other product teams, and so myself and a few partners started SVPG. We're just small, but we work with almost, I mean, that's the great thing. Our timing couldn't have been better. We got to work with early Google, early Amazon, got to work with Apple, got to work with LinkedIn, got to work, a little later, Facebook and Twitter, but pretty much a who's who of the tech industry. All right, so I mentioned there are several kinds of product teams out there. Sometimes I only half jokingly refer to them as the good, the bad, the ugly for those who recognize the Clint Eastwood film. And I'm actually going to describe these in the reversed order. We'll start with the ugly. Obviously, I'm here to try to convince you, if you are not running in one of it as an empowered product team, the good, I'm trying to convince you it's worth your effort to consider switching. And now I don't want to take that lightly. Switching is not easy. It's hard. I'll try to give you a sense for what's required, but I want you to, in this talk, in these minutes I have with you, I'd really like you to understand the difference between these teams. So even though they may look alike from superficially, they are fundamentally different, really in many important ways. So we'll start with the ugly. The ugly I refer to as delivery teams. Delivery teams, and if you look holistically at the industry, now I'm not just talking about product companies, but I'm talking about banks and insurance companies. Most of them are delivery teams. If you're running processes like SAFe or less, you're delivery teams. And frankly, you have my sympathy. There's very little you can do. It's not the kind of place I'd ever want to work in. It's not kind of place anybody I know would want to work in, but I do realize a lot of the world runs that way. Just so that you know what that is, delivery teams are all about ship and code. It's all about coding. So they're provided a backlog of stories and asked to deliver. So it's really about code, QA, test, deploy. It's typically staffed with engineers, not accidentally on delivery teams. Very often these companies outsource those engineers. So they're not even staff engineers. They're outsourced. They're third party. They're offshore. And then they have a backlog administrator. I mean that because that's really their job. They're usually called a product owner, but it is nothing like a product manager. They rarely have designers. It's basically just a product owner who's administering a backlog and a bunch of developers cranking out code. If that's what you think you need, great. But in my world, that's not helpful because our world is all about consistent innovation. And I don't mean like, coming up with a vaccine for a pandemic. I mean just consistently adding value for our customers and our business. That's how we define innovation, consistently adding value. There's a lot of small, there's some big, but it's constantly adding value, not just capturing value. That's called optimization. So if your mission, if your organization exists to create value, if it exists to innovate, delivery teams honestly are a non-starter. And I'm not going to waste my time or your time really talking about those. If you're in an organization that's how you run, you have to decide. If you can get the leaders to get enlightened, then it's worth changing, but otherwise you probably need to go to a better company. All right. So in the product world, most companies are actually feature teams. Feature teams are not nearly as bad as delivery teams, but they're bad. So that's why it's the bad and the good, the bad, the ugly. They're not really, you're not using your people to their potential. So what are feature teams? And by the way, I'm using my own definition here of feature teams. Don't confuse that with some processes like to name things feature teams, which is remarkable because it's an incredibly bad thing to name a team, because by the reason we use that term is it's all about output. It's still about output. It's not about results. Feature teams exist to serve the business. You'll hear that phrase literally a lot. They exist to serve the business. Then who is the business? These are stakeholders. So in medium and large company, there are all these different stakeholders out there. And they will create basically these roadmaps every quarter of features and projects that they need done. And they'll give those to the quote product teams, which are really feature teams, because they're there to serve the business. They're given the solution, like we need you to add this payment method. We need you to add videos for our onboarding process, whatever. You've all seen roadmaps. And then when they get that, they're asked to design, workflow, apply the company style guide, and deliver. Again, code, QA, test, deploy. And okay, it's a little better. Normally, these are not outsourced, at least. These are staffed with our own engineers. I'll talk about why that's so important in a minute. They usually have some kind of designer, and they almost always have somebody with the title product manager. Now, I got to be honest with you. That kind of product manager is the kind of product manager that gives product management a bad name, because these product managers are really project managers. There is no product management in the sense that good companies mean in a feature team company. Now, I need to explain why, and I will. I'm going to drill into that in my next point. But for now, they look alike. Again, there's engineers, there's a designer, there's a product manager, but all they're doing is some design, little design, maybe a little usability testing, and then code. So it is still all about output. Those, unfortunately, are very common, these feature team organizations, at least in companies where the leaders have never worked at a good company. They haven't really done the Amazon thing before or anything, and so they think this is kind of the thing to do. It's a very IT-derived thing. So in a classic IT organization, IT is there to serve the business. And as you guys, hopefully, many of you know, most of you know, that's not a product company. So this is, in fact, what it means to change from IT to a product mindset company. All right, so let's talk about the good, in the good, the bad, the ugly. Good is what I'm referring to here as empowered product teams. They're all product teams, loosely speaking, but the good here are empowered product teams. Now, these teams, the differences, I want you to really understand how deep these differences go. It starts with the purpose of the product team. They're not there to serve customers. Sorry, they're not there to serve stakeholders. They're not there to serve the business. They're there to serve real customers. Now, I'm talking about, I was talking to a company the other day where they literally were telling their people to consider their stakeholders as their customers. That is so broken. Whack. That is not right. The customers are the ones that really buy the services that we provide as a company. So an empowered product team is there to serve those customers, but in ways that meet the needs of the business. So nobody is suggesting that an empowered product team ignores the needs of the business, ignores the marketing constraints, the financial constraints, the compliance constraints. That's all normal. But our job is to come up with solutions that those customers love, but work within the constraints of our business. That's what an empowered product team is all about. And I would challenge you, think of any of your favorite products, really, whether it's an iPhone, whether it's an Alexa device, whether it's a Peloton, I don't know why I got devices in my head. It could be Slack. It could be Shopify, amazing. It could be Spotify. Any of these, I promise you, it was an empowered product team that did this. It's not an accident. They don't come out of those factory models. All right, so the second thing, these product teams now, instead of being given a roadmap of features and projects, these teams are given customer or business problems to solve. So the level of abstraction is way higher. Instead of saying build this feature, you're saying solve this problem. And these problems are often really difficult problems. It's like, we don't want to distract drivers by our mobile app. We need to solve that issue. Or we have churn rate that's way too high. Churn is how many people don't, resubscribe to our product, and we need to reduce that. Or the time it takes for a new customer to get live with our product is way too long. These are problems to solve. Now, when you give a team a problem to solve, you're not giving them the solution. That's kind of the idea. Don't give them the solution. This is what it means to empower a team. You are giving them the problem, and they are considered to be in the best position to come up with the best solution to that problem. Now, when we say discover a solution to that problem, we mean a solution that is valuable. The customer will buy it or choose to use it. It's usable. They can figure out how to use it. It's feasible. We know how to build it with the technology stack we have, with the skill sets we have, and with the time we have. And it's viable. It does work within the constraints of our business. What does that? That's actually a big one. It means that, first of all, it's legal, it's compliant, it respects privacy considerations, things like that. But it's also something we can pay for. It's also something we can monetize. It's something we can afford and viably market. So that our acquisition costs, we can sell, we can service. All of that's part of viability. There are many solutions out there. It's actually not that hard to come up with a product that your customers absolutely love, but it can be very hard to come up with a solution that they love and supports a real business. But that's what we do. That's what product teams do. They're responsible for both discovering and delivering a solution to those problems. Now, they look alike in the sense that they're staffed with engineers, a designer, but now they have a real product manager. Again, the same title, product manager, but when I say true product manager, now you can start to see the difference. You heard me say that a good solution is valuable, usable, feasible, and viable. Sort of obvious that usable is the designer's responsibility, feasible is the engineer's responsibility, but value and viability is what product managers do. And in fact, if you have a real product manager at your company, if you have real ones, and you ask them what they do, their answer should be, I'm responsible for value and viability, because that's their contribution to a product team. If they give you this hemming and hawing about how they herd the cats, then they're a feature team product manager, which, like I said, is a project manager, really, with an overpaid project manager is what it really is. Okay, so they look like superficially. Another really important thing, especially for CEOs, is that an empowered product team, since you're giving them problems to solve rather than features to build, now they can be accountable to outcomes. And unless you've been living under a rock in the last several years, you've hopefully heard lots of talk about how great product teams are all about delivering on outcomes, delivering results. It's not just about shipping. You guys know this, that today virtually every team I work with is already doing continuous deployment on a per team basis. So every team is turning out things every day. Output, what does output mean? When we release something, who cares? What matters is when we actually solve the problem. We often have to do many releases of things before we have solved that problem. So that's what we want to do. We want to empower organizations to figure out the best way to solve. We want to empower product teams to figure out the best way to solve problems. And then we want to be able to hold them accountable to results. Now, I know that probably you've all heard lots of talks on process. I'm not a process. I feel like process is over. People pay too much attention to process. Is really not that important. Process causes more damage in most organizations than good. That's an especially hot button in Europe. It's more like a disease over there. But what I want to say here is I don't really care what process your teams use, whether they use Scrum or Kanban. Obviously, there is a whole thing around fake agile that is unfortunately all too real. I'm not assuming that mainly because that kind of thing prevents teams from doing what they need to do. But in terms of process, doesn't matter. I know a lot of great teams, they release constantly. They don't follow any formal process. They're awesome. What does matter is three things. And honestly, when I sit down with a product team for the first time over video, hopefully soon back in person, I'm asking and looking at these three things because these are what I've learned matter. And if you want to really judge your product teams to see how good they are, these are the things I would encourage you to look at. So three things. The first is, are they addressing these product risks early? So you should recognize those risks. I've highlighted them a couple times. These are the 4 risks in every tech-powered product: value, usability, feasibility, viability. Those, I defined them before. Those always exist. Now, sometimes we're working on things that are basically super easy and no-brainers, and we literally take 30 seconds, and the tech lead and the designer and the product manager says, is anybody nervous about any of this? And they say no. It just goes right on the backlog. Fine. We save our time for the hard things, because what really moves the needle in most companies are not those no-brainer things. They're the harder problems we're working on. And that's where we'll focus on these risks. What this is getting at is, and I'm going to be very explicit here, the product manager, the product designer, and at least the engineering lead need to make sure that these risks have been considered and addressed before the engineers are asked to write a line of production code. Okay? Now, my favorite topic in the whole, category of product is, how do you do that? That's called product discovery. If anybody is interested in that topic, like I said, it's my favorite topic. There's a book called Inspired. David mentioned it. There's a all new second edition, so just newer. And it talks about all the techniques. What I will say is that we have many techniques to do this. It's mostly around prototyping, 4 main kinds of prototypes. We have quantitative techniques, qualitative techniques, but product discovery is all about how do you address these risks early before you write a line of code. That's what the first thing. Is that happening? If that's not happening, I guarantee you are wasting the time of your engineers. Time and money. And of course, the biggest issue is usually opportunity cost. What you should have and could have been doing in all that time. So that's number one. And I just will mention, because this is such a common problem, a lot of people, what I'm talking about done right are MVPs. These prototypes are MVPs. But so many companies don't understand what an MVP really is. They take many months to do this. And furthermore, they're using their engineers to do it. They're basically they understand the buzzword, but they don't understand what it means. The idea here, address the risk early. The second theme is, how does the team solve problems? Hopefully many of you recognize this. This is why waterfall is so bad. As far as process, waterfall is not good. Why? Because of the way problems are solved. There's a lot of issues, actually, like all the risk is at the end. The first issue doesn't have that either. But this is the hallmark of waterfall is products are defined sequentially. What does that mean? Some product manager or some executive decides what it should be. They either write up user stories or they write up PRDs, if you even know what that stands for, product requirements documents. These were requirements of what we want built. Then whoever this arrogant person is would throw it over to the designer, and the designer would say, and they'd say to the designer, I need wireframes, I need comps, get that for me. Okay, once that's there, they say, let's go to sprint planning. So they go to sprint planning and they go to the engineers and they say, here, build this. Now, even though I just described an agile context, right? Sprint planning, sprints, this is anything but agile. This is literally waterfall. That just cascaded right down requirements, design, implementation. You get almost no innovation in that model. Why? Because the reality in tech products is that is not how tech products are created. In good product companies, they understand that the way we solve hard problems is collaboratively. And I don't mean that as a buzzword. If you know me, you know that's the last thing I care about. I mean it literally. In a good product team, they know that the little secret in product is that consistently the best single source of innovation are the engineers, not the customers, not the executives, and not the product managers or designers. It's the engineers. How come? Because they're working with the enabling technology every single day. So it puts them in the best possible position to see what's just now possible. And that's where innovation comes from. So the point is, good product teams understand that. And so they know that the engineering, the enabling technology will inform the functionality as much as the other way around. They know that the technology will inform the user experience as much as the other way around. They know that the experience will inform the functionality as much as the other way around, which is why in a good product team, product design and engineering are working this out together. They are all given the problem at the same time. This is the part that kills me. In so many companies, the talent in engineering is absolutely wasted because they're not even invited to the party. When the product is being conceived, they're not even there. The single most useful people to have there are not even invited. This is in a nutshell the difference between most companies and great companies. Even though that's such a major, blatant difference, this is the reality in so many places. Okay, so the second thing we're looking for is how do they solve problems? Are they figuring them out side by side? And in case you're wondering, the pandemic has not really hurt companies' ability to do delivery, but it has hurt the company's ability to do discovery because of this. This dynamic I'm describing is way easier face-to-face than it is remotely. And we, as an industry, we've been dealing with it. We have techniques to help mitigate, but don't fool yourself. Amazon, Google, they know it's more effective when they're co-located. All right. And the final point is what I was emphasizing before. I'm looking, are they focused on results or are they focused just on output? Right? Shipping code is not enough for a good product company. Obviously, it's a lot harder to be accountable to results. In fact, I learned very early in my career the little tricks of the trade in order to ship something on time, on budget every time. It's not that hard, actually. Of course, you wouldn't want to use the stuff you would ship. It was pretty bad, but it's easy to hit those dates. And that is, of course, it's much harder to be focused on results. But that's what good teams do because that's the only thing that matters. All right, this is not a process diagram. I don't want to freak anybody out, but I just want to point out conceptually, this is what's going on in a product team. They're given a problem to solve. That's what objectives are for. And by the way, if you are a feature team org, don't waste your time with OKRs. They're not designed for your kind of company. You're just going to waste your time like thousands of companies have figured out. They are designed for empowered teams. But you're given a problem to solve. That's the objective. And then discovery is the process of prototyping, figuring out a solution that's valuable, usable, feasible, viable. Once you feel like you've got reasonable evidence and confidence, you have a reasonable solution, it goes on the backlog. And delivery is building production quality software, reliable, secure, scalable, performant, fault tolerant. This is what we do. Discovery is all about prototypes and seeing if it does what we need to do. Delivery is all about products and selling those. So that's what's going on for each product team. Now, some teams call it discovery, delivery. Some teams call it, there's like a dozen other phrases for this. But it's like I love at Airbnb, they call it build things that don't scale, build things that do scale. Early Google called it fake it before you make it. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of describing this, but essentially, this is what's going on. All right. So just want to finish there. If you're not sure if your organization is empowered teams or maybe feature teams, I'm pretty sure you'd know if you're delivery teams. But if you're not sure of the difference, this simple little litmus test will tell you. First of all, are you staffing your product teams with cross-functional skill sets? When we say cross-functional, we don't mean front and back end engineers or anything silly like that. We're talking about product management, product design, engineering. If you need it, data science. If you need it, user research. If you need it, product marketing. But the right set of skills, and that they're competent. I mean that, literally, do you have a competent product manager? If you don't, you've got no chance at doing what we need to do. Second, is the team given problems to solve, or are they given features to build? If they're an empowered team, they're given problems to solve, and they are able to figure out the best way to solve those problems. And then finally, is the team accountable for solving those customer or business problems, the outcome, or are they just think they're there for shipping code? All right. I ran a minute or two later. I did want to mention that there's actually now 2 books. So I need to gift one to David. But there's Inspired is for product teams. It's been out a couple years. It's if you read the original edition, I'm grateful for that. But there's not a single page from the first edition in the second. Our industry moved so much further in those 10 years. So Inspired is for product teams, how you do product discovery especially. And Empowered is for product leaders. It's for the leaders of product management, product design, and engineering, and how they create the environment that their teams need in order to do good work. So those are the 2 books. You also see my email there. And feel free, if David and I don't talk about your question, if you want to reach out to me later, that is just fine. But anyway, I know I just threw a lot of information at you. I hope nobody's too shell-shocked. But I can see that David is still conscious, so maybe I can have David join me again.
Thank you, Marty. That was wonderful. What I really appreciate I've actually heard you talk before, which maybe wouldn't surprise you too much, but I appreciate how real and authentic and very direct that you are about the state of the industry and the state of the function, or rather dysfunction, of many products teams out there in the world. I also imagine that a lot of folks that are listening may be experiencing a little bit of shell shock from the trauma and wake up call that they may be, in fact, in a delivery organization, or at least in an unempowered product organization, if you will. So I appreciate you awakening us all to these distinctions. So with that, we have about 10 minutes for questions, and there's a lot that we could cover, but I want to dive in with this first one here. And by the way, folks, if you have other questions, you want to upvote, go to the Q&A tab on the side. So this first question from Frank is, can you elaborate more a little on your comment on OKRs? Where do they make sense and where not?
I know I threw a bunch of those little grenades out there, didn't I? But
it was great.
Yeah, I'm, first of all, for the record, I'm a big advocate of OKRs, but I realized a few years ago that many companies that it is totally not appropriate for were trying to use it. And of course, they didn't understand. And, honestly, I blame that stupid video that Google did years ago. They made it sound so easy. And it's like, what are you doing, Google? They didn't explain. Google is one of the original empowered team companies. It totally makes sense for Google. It went from Intel to Google through John Doerr. And so here's the thing. In fact, I know a lot of people at Google that don't even realize that there are other kinds of product teams. They think anybody'd be insane to do that. I was just told that I'm wasting my time by a friend of mine because he's like, what company would not use that model? All the successful companies use that model. Are they crazy? But the reality is that most don't. And here's the thing. If you're a feature team organization and you're giving your team roadmaps, you are giving them output. it makes no sense to also give them an outcome, right? They will just say, look, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to solve the problem, or do you already solve it for me? And so what happens in OKR, in companies that are feature teams that try to do OKRs, it's even got a name. It's called OKR theater. They like a bunch of activities in song and dance, at the beginning of the quarter, end of the quarter. Everybody says, no, we didn't do any of that stuff, because really they had to deliver their roadmap. So if you're going to stay with feature teams, I tell people, don't waste your time with OKRs. But if you're an empowered organization, you need a good way to assign work. And that's what OKRs are, a way to, the objective are the problems to solve, and the key results are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. That's where it's not an accident that it aligns that way. That's how Andy Grove designed the technique for exactly that model. So yeah, that's what's going on there. Still with me, David? Can you hear us, David? Maybe not. I can. I see questions here, so if Cappy or people still hearing me, I can answer them, read them, and answer them. Maybe nobody can hear me. Maybe I'm the one that's turned off. But I'll just start. I see that Frank asked a question here. Oh, that was the one we just talked about. Gwen
hey, Marty,
asked,
I'll replace
sure.
David until he comes back.
All right.
There we go. So some geographies have a cultural norm of seeking consensus before arriving at a decision. How does product management work in those geographies?
Oh, Deepak, that is a good question, but you're not going to like the answer. Consensus organizations are, they come from a very good place. They are trying to be inclusive. They are the opposite of empowered. Okay, they are the opposite of empowered. They are, in fact, very disempowering. The reason is because in a consensus organization, anybody can say no. So it makes it very hard to make any kind of decisions. It is the opposite of what good companies do. And I always had sensitivity to this because it's not coming from an evil place. It's not coming from a dictatorship mindset, nothing like that. But it is not conducive to product teams. The idea here is to push decisions down to teams. If you've heard Netflix's mantra on this, it's lead with context, not control. You don't want to control them. It's not command and control. You push the context down and you let the teams make decisions. It is not a democracy. It is not a consensus. The way good teams make decisions is collaboration. Basically, if it's a design-related decision, you defer to the designer. If it's an engineering-related decision, you defer to engineering. If it's regarding value or viability, you defer to the product manager. And occasionally, we still disagree. Happens all the time. We run a test. We run a quick test. We do something like a prototype. We'll get some qualitative or quantitative data, and we'll say, all right, now we know. So you really want to fight this. And in the question that was talking about geographies, it is true there are a few cultures in the world. I'm not talking about company cultures. I'm really talking about, national cultures where consensus is very ingrained. And I will tell you, I'm having a real hard time in those countries getting them to be able to innovate. So it's tough. And there's another culture like that, that's not consensus. It's more in certain countries in the world. This is no secret. In certain countries in the world, there is a very deeply rooted deference to authority. And that obviously gets right in the way of innovation. We can't do anything if we can't debate with anybody, including the CEO. So that's another tough culture.
I'm appreciative of that. And as I reflect on some of the teams that I've worked with who've been kind of dominated by cultures like that, like sometimes you work with a third party in another country for whom that's kind of the commonality. Something that I guess, because I imagine that there's a set of people who may be feeling a little bit crushed that they may be part of a culture or an organization that's very authoritarian. They may be maybe within a delivery team amongst that organization, et cetera. And maybe the recommendation to those people is like, maybe you should look for someone else to work. However, my hope is that, and I know this may not be a total topic for you because you focus on innovation, but let me ask, is there a place in the world for not innovating but still delivering product?
I think there is probably, but not in our world. Our world of tech-powered products, it's all about innovation. I think it was Reid Hoffman that said, the day you stop innovating is the day you start to die. And I really think it's true. And we see it. I mean, there's so many examples. One of the reasons I'm such a fanboy of Stripe right now, first of all, Stripe is just flat out good. So I admire that. But one of the things I really love about them is they're disrupting an industry that has deserved disruption forever. And I love that industry is finally getting shaken up. I'm a consumer. I've been waiting for a Stripe to come along. I can't wait for a Stripe to come along and disrupt the telcos. They're horrible. They never. Healthcare. I can't wait for the ones to come along to disrupt healthcare. Look at American healthcare. It's oh my God, it's horrible. So I love that, and I think in our industry, anybody who sits down, I realize I'm a product person, so I'm always naturally paranoid. I'm always worried that somebody's going to come take our customers, take our business. But yeah, I don't think you can stop taking care of your customers. You can stop.
Makes sense.
I would just mention Amazon. Bezos likes to call that becoming a day two organization. So if you're into his stuff, it's great.
Excellent. We have time for one or two more questions. This one from Gwen. Can a company be both sales driven, e.g. sales, product engineering led companies, and have good product teams?
What's important here in Gwen's question is what literally is meant by sales driven. If there is nothing wrong with a strong sales organization, there's lots of great companies that have strong sales organizations. But if they are in the driver's seat, I've never seen it come out with good products. And it's not their fault, of course. It's just that this is the first principle of modern product is our customers can't tell us what to build. And unfortunately, if the sales org is just the conduit for those requests that are usually coming along with a big check being dangled, then that will happen, of course. And it's not that customers aren't smart. It's not that salespeople aren't smart. It's that none of them know what's possible.
I appreciate, this idea of when customers say they want something to reverse engineer what's their problem and then solve the problem. So this last question from Sergio is, what's your advice to convince stakeholders to stop providing a feature list and switch to a list of problems, especially when they consider themselves as subject matter experts, so they think they know what's best?
Yeah, I mean, this is the fundamental question. How do you convince a leadership team to move to the empowered model? And first of all, there are lots of others way besides me. There's a great book that came out just recently, literally very recently, by Reed Hastings from Netflix called No Rules Rules. He makes the Netflix argument for why you should work this way. There's a book that just came out a couple months before from two longtime Amazonians called Working Backwards. It makes the Amazon argument for why you should work this way. I mean, there are, and there's books from other industries. There's some great ones that talk about lessons from the special forces, like the SEAL teams, and how they know they have to work this way. Though there's all kinds of experts that talk about why you would want to move this way. Most executives I meet, they know that this is important. The question they struggle with is how? How? Because they start to figure out, well, first of all, they all think that moving to Agile will do it. And of course it doesn't. Agile doesn't address most of this. They should move to Agile if they're not, but it's hard to find an organization anymore that isn't at least running Scrum. The issue is The issue is that doesn't do it. That doesn't address these things. And they start to realize, man, it impacts finance, it impacts sales and marketing, it impacts legal, it impacts HR. What are we going to do? And that's where they often need real help to really become that kind of company. It is hard. That's true.
Awesome. Marty, we've hit our time limit. I want to thank you so much for your wisdom, your time, your energy. I think you've set us all onto a mental path of how can we maybe shift an output mindset to an impact mindset. I'm definitely very mindful of that myself. So thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.